The text came in at 2:47 in the afternoon, right in the middle of me cross-referencing the quarterly shipping logs. Who did you eat lunch with? No greeting, no context. Just Joel, reaching through my phone screen to account for every hour he couldn't physically see me. Alone in the break room, I typed back, which was true today, and set the phone face down on the desk before the next question could arrive. Everything okay? I looked up. Cassian Varro stood in the doorway of his private office, the one that connected to the open floor plan in a way that meant he could see my desk if he chose to. With a coffee cup in one hand and an expression I'd spent 3 years learning not to interpret. He wore charcoal, always charcoal, the kind of quietly expensive that didn't need to announce itself. Fine, I said, just the audit numbers. He looked at my phone, then back at me. If you need anything, he said quietly, my direct line is in your contacts, day or night. He said it like a statement of fact, not an offer. Then he went back inside and the glass door closed, and I sat for a full minute staring at a spreadsheet I couldn't read. That was Cassian Varro. 3 years of that, careful proximity, impossible to misread and impossible to act on. I knew what he was. Everyone in Chicago's shipping industry knew what Varro International was, the way you know about a river's current without ever stepping into the water. The legitimate side of the business was real, profitable, handled by people like me who asked the questions our job descriptions required and no others. What moved through the shadows of it was something I had chosen not to examine closely. The rent on my apartment and the quiet reliability of my paycheck had made that choice easy. Joel's jealousy had made it harder. It started small, the way these things always do. He didn't like that I worked late. He didn't like Tom from the legal team, who was 62 and kept pictures of his grandchildren on his desk. He didn't like client dinners, or that my boss was a man, or that I sometimes came home too tired to give him the emotional attention he felt he was owed. 6 months ago, he'd asked me to share my location. Just so I know you're safe, he said, and I'd thought, that's love. That's what it looks like when someone is afraid of losing you. I said yes. By the time I understood what it actually was, my world had gotten very small. I went home that evening to find Joel in the kitchen, 3 beers in, his camera equipment spread across the table like evidence of ambition he'd stopped acting on. He was a freelance photographer when we met, that version of him, excited, curious, filling my apartment with images from weekend drives we took along the lake, had become someone I could barely picture. You stayed late, he said without looking up. By 12 minutes, the audit figures weren't reconciling. Cassian Varro keeps you late a lot. He's my employer. He keeps you late, not the other analysts. He set down his beer with the deliberateness of someone choosing every movement carefully. I've noticed. I had learned over the past several months that there was no right answer to this kind of question. Agreement was a confession. Denial was a lie he'd already convicted me of. I set my bag down and started toward the cabinet for the pasta. He grabbed my wrist. Not violently, that's what no one tells you. The first time is never violent exactly. It's just firm, just pressure that says stay here and listen, and you tell yourself it isn't what it looks like, because the alternative is a truth you're not ready to hold yet. I'm talking to you, he said. Joel, you think I don't see what's happening? 4 years I've watched you dress for that office. 4 years of Cassian Varro's name in your mouth. He's my boss, I said, and I kept my voice level the way I'd learned to. There's nothing. Don't. His grip tightened. Don't explain it to me like I'm stupid. The argument that followed was familiar in shape and new in scale. He was louder than he'd ever been. He'd had more to drink than I'd noticed. And then there was a moment. I reached for my phone. I just wanted to step away. And his hand came up. The slap was not hard in the way of movies. It was fast and sharp, and it lit up the left side of my face like a fuse being triggered. I stood very still, and something inside me went completely quiet. He stared at what he'd done. I watched it move through him. The shock, the horror, then the beginning of something that looked like explanation. Don't, I said. My voice didn't shake. I'm still surprised by that. You need to leave. Audrey. Right now, or I'm calling the police. He left. He slammed the door and he left, and I sank down onto the kitchen floor with my back against the lower cabinets and stayed there, The side of my face throbbed. My wrists had already started darkening where his fingers had been. I opened my contacts. I scrolled past my sister in Seattle. I couldn't do that to her on a Tuesday night. Past the college friends I'd seen less and less of, since Joel decided they didn't make me happy the way he did. Past my mother, who had said once, quietly and exactly once, "I'm not sure about this one, sweetheart." I stopped on a number I had never dialed. Saved 2.5 years ago when Cassian handed me his card in a hallway and said what he'd said again today. At the time I'd saved it the way you save a number you expect you'll never need. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. Audrey, not hello, just my name, immediate and steady like he'd been waiting for it. The sentence broke apart in my throat. Can you come get me? I don't know who else to call. A brief silence then. Where are you? My apartment. But Joel might come back and I. Lock your door, both locks. I'm 12 minutes away. Stay on the phone. He stayed on the line the whole drive. He didn't ask questions. He just kept talking. About the road, about nothing, about something I couldn't track but found steadying anyway, until I heard his voice through the door as well as through the speaker. He'd actually run from wherever he'd parked. He took one look at my face and something moved through his expression. There and gone so fast I might have imagined it. He didn't touch me. He said, "Let's go," and picked up my bag, and I followed him to the elevator without questioning a single thing. His penthouse was in River North. I knew he was wealthy in the abstract way you know things about your employer. Seeing it in practice, floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below like a lit map, a guest suite larger than my entire apartment, made the abstract very real. "You're safe here," he said at the door. "Raphael is posted at the main entrance. My room is on the other end of the hall." He paused. "Will you let me call my doctor? Just to document everything, in case." The in case was doing a lot of work. I knew what he meant. "Okay," I said. Dr. Paige Anand arrived within 40 minutes. She was efficient and thorough, and her expression gave nothing away until she saw the full bruising on my wrists, at which point her mouth pressed into a thin line. She photographed everything, time-stamped. She left me with pain medication and instructions for the next 48 hours. I stood under the shower for a long time. The hot water and the silence and the sheer distance from my own apartment made something inside me start to come loose. Not in a falling apart way, but in the way of something that's been held too tightly, finally getting to release a muscle it had forgotten was clenched. Cassian was at the window when I came out, a glass of something dark in his hand, the city blazing below him. He'd changed into jeans and a gray t-shirt. He looked so different from the man in the charcoal suit that I had to recalibrate. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said without turning. "Not the police report, not anything. You just have to sleep." "That's it?" He turned and looked at me with the particular directness I'd been navigating for 3 years. "That's it," he said. I slept. Whatever Dr. Anand had given me smoothed the sharp edges, and I went under quickly and didn't dream. I woke to sunlight and unfamiliar walls. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Joel, and 22 texts I couldn't look at past the first one. "I'm so sorry. Please come home." I closed the app and opened my bank account instead, because I'd had a thought in the dark that I'd told myself was paranoia and needed to check in daylight. The checking account balance was $94. I'd deposited $2,800 from my paycheck 6 days ago. I clicked through the recent transactions. Transfer, withdrawal, transfer. To accounts and references I didn't recognize, over and over, stretching back 3 months at least. I pulled up my credit report through the federal site. I hadn't checked it in over a year. 4 credit cards I had never opened. A personal loan for $12,000, 60 days past due. A second loan for $8,500, 42 days past due. Almost $22,000 in debt attached to my name, my social security number, my address. Not a dollar of it spent by me. I called Cassian. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm already on my way back," he said before I could speak. "Stay there." He was home in 20 minutes. I walked him through every line of it, the drained account, the fraudulent credit applications, the loans, without breaking down, which surprised me. I wasn't sad. I was so far past sad that it had become something else entirely. Something cold and clean and absolutely certain. He stole from me, I said, systematically, for months. While I was paying our rent and buying our groceries and filing a joint tax return he insisted on. I set the phone down on the counter between us. I need to report it, all of it. Cassian looked at me for a moment. Yes, he said. And I'm going to call my attorney, and then we're going to build something he can't talk his way out of. Detective Lee Donahue, out of Chicago PD's Financial Crimes Division, had tired eyes and a yellow legal pad and the patience of someone who had heard everything and stopped being surprised. She let me talk for 90 minutes without interrupting. This is more organized than most of what I see, she said. When I laid out the documentation I'd started compiling in the 2 days since leaving my apartment. Most people come in with a bank statement and a bad feeling. You've got a timeline, transaction records, and credit applications. I wanted to make sure there were no gaps, I said. Nothing he could use to suggest I'd agreed to any of it. Did you? No. She looked at me steadily. Then let's make the record reflect that. Joel's arrest came 6 weeks later. Handwriting analysis on the loan applications was conclusive. The signatures were forged, close but not close enough, a detail he'd miscalculated. He was charged with 4 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of domestic battery. The time-stamped photographs from Dr. Anand turned out to matter more than I'd expected. He made bail. His parents paid it within hours. The texts started again that night from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew the rhythm of them. You're making a mistake. We can fix this. And then, a few days later, I know where you work. You think this is over? I forwarded everyone to Detective Donahue. She added them to the file without comment. Cassian offered the penthouse indefinitely. I stayed 6 weeks and was grateful for every one of them. But I needed my own space. I needed to know I could exist without someone else's infrastructure holding me together. I found a 1-bedroom in Lincoln Square, 2 blocks from the running path along the river. Running was the thing I'd surrendered without quite noticing. Joel said the early routes weren't safe. The evening ones put me around people he didn't know. He worried. I'd stopped, gradually, the way I'd stopped doing a lot of things gradually, until the version of me who ran 6 miles before work on weekend mornings was so far away I could barely picture her. I signed the lease on a Thursday, moved in Saturday, ran 4 miles on Sunday morning, slow and uncertain, like starting a language I'd once been fluent in. My lungs burned, my legs remembered before the rest of me did. I came back and sat on my kitchen floor, clean tile, mine, no one else's anger soaked into the walls, and cried for the first time since the night this all started. Not from grief, from the particular relief of occupying space that was entirely your own. The trial lasted 4 days. I was on the stand for most of one afternoon. I answered every question in the same clear, level voice I'd been practicing, and I didn't look at Joel once. His attorney suggested I'd authorized the loans during a rough patch, that this was a woman with a grudge rewriting history. The forensic accountant testified that the digital applications had been submitted from an IP address linked to Joel's personal laptop. The handwriting analyst testified that the signatures were not mine. The jury took 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. I stood outside the courthouse in the March wind, and Cassian was there. He'd been in the gallery, which I hadn't known until I turned and found him coming out behind me. He stood beside me on the steps, and didn't say anything right away, just present the way he'd been present through most of this, without making it about himself. "It's done," I said finally. "Yes," he said, "how do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. Empty, but clean empty, like a room after everything's been moved out and the windows are open. He looked at me. "That's a good kind of empty." I know. The months that followed were the quietest of my adult life, and I mean that the way quiet is a gift rather than an absence. I ran every morning. I started a pottery class on Thursday evenings, something I'd wanted for years but had never gotten around to, or been made to feel vaguely silly for wanting. My hands in wet clay, building something from nothing, felt like the most honest metaphor I'd ever participated in. Cassian and I kept to our professional arrangement at work, mostly. But there were morning coffees that became a habit. His office 30 minutes, Conversation that steadily expanded past quarterly reports into books and cities and opinions on things that didn't require consensus. He never pushed. He never made it into something it wasn't ready to be. That restraint was not a small thing. I had spent years with a man who couldn't tolerate an hour of my time that wasn't accounted for. Cassian would disappear for a week on business and come back, and simply pick up the thread wherever we'd left it. No accounting, no penalty for the gap. Just continuity. One evening, a complicated customs inquiry had required him to spend most of an afternoon on calls I wasn't party to. I'd watched him go from employer to something considerably colder in the span of a single conversation, the way the ground shifts, and you remember what's underneath it. He came back into the office at 8, tie gone, expression carrying the weight of whatever the call had required. He stopped when he saw me still at my desk. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "The filing deadline is tomorrow morning. Your legal team needed these indexed." I handed him the folder. And then, because something about the hour made honesty feel easier than carefulness, "I know what you are, Cassian. I've known for a while, the parts of this that aren't clean. And I'm still here. I want that to mean something, even if I don't know yet what to do with it." He was very still for a moment, then he said, "Take your time, I'm not going anywhere." The first time he called me Stella. We were in the conference room after the others had left, working through the quarterly logistics review, and I flagged a routing pattern that had been quietly costing us money for 2 years. He looked at me with that direct look and said, "You see everything, don't you, Stella?" "What does that mean?" I asked. "Star, in Italian," he said it without decoration. "You carry light whether you mean to or not." I looked at him for a beat. That's either the smoothest thing anyone said to me, or I've been working too many late hours. "Both can be true," he said, and almost smiled. By June I was ready. Not in the way of having processed every difficult thing until it lay flat and harmless. I don't think it works that way. Ready in the way of knowing that the choice I was making came from fullness rather than need. From choosing a direction instead of fleeing one. I asked to speak with him privately on a Friday afternoon, not in his office. I didn't want it to feel like a meeting. The small roof terrace off the main floor, where a few chairs sat beside a planter box that Gloria kept going through the summer. I told him what I'd been thinking since March, maybe longer. That the pull between us had always been real, and I'd spent a long time telling myself it was inappropriate. That I understood now why I'd deferred to Joel's version of reality over my own, and that I was done doing that. That I knew what his world contained, the edges that weren't clean, and I wasn't naive, and I wasn't afraid, and I was making this choice with my eyes fully open. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I have wanted to say something to you," he said, "for longer than I'm comfortable admitting. But I wasn't willing to do it while you were healing. You needed to come back to yourself first. And I needed to be sure that whatever you felt wasn't gratitude wearing a different coat." "It's not," I said. "I know." His eyes stayed on mine. "I can tell the difference." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm in love with you, Audrey. That didn't happen recently. It happened slowly, and then all at once, the way things do when you've been paying attention for a long time." I crossed the space between us and kissed him, and it was nothing like I'd braced for, and exactly what I should have expected. Deliberate, unhurried. The kind of kiss that belongs to someone who has no interest in rushing because they intend to stay. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. "What happens now?" I asked. "Dinner," he said. "A real one, where I sit across from you and we talk about things that have nothing to do with shipping manifests. A pause, and after that we figure out the rest. Together, at whatever pace you need." We figured out the rest together. It was not always easy. There were evenings when Cassian's phone rang, and his expression went somewhere cold and focused, and he would disappear for hours into conversations I wasn't part of. I had made my peace with that, not because I was blind to it, but because I understood the difference between acceptance and pretending. I wasn't acting like the shadows didn't exist. I was choosing the whole person, knowing what the whole person contained. He, in turn, never once made me feel small for the time I needed, or for the way certain sounds still made me flinch before I could stop myself, or for the fact that trust, once it's been turned against you, grows back slowly and in its own particular shape. 8 months after that Friday on the roof terrace, we were on the running path along the river where I had started over. Early October, leaves turning, the city doing its autumn thing, and he stopped walking for no clear reason. I turned to look at him. He was holding a small box. "I had a plan for this," he said, which was very unlike him. "A restaurant, the whole thing. But we're here, which is where you started again, and that seems like the right place." He opened the box. The ring was a solitaire, simple, the kind you wear every day without worrying about it. "I love you," he said. "I have loved watching you rebuild yourself from the ground up. I want to spend the rest of my life being someone you choose. Not because you need me, but because you want me. All of me. Will you marry me?" I was already crying, which a year ago would have embarrassed me. "Yes," I said, "obviously yes." He slid the ring on and pulled me into him, and I pressed my face against his shoulder and stayed there while the path moved around us, joggers and dog walkers, and all of ordinary Chicago passing by, completely indifferent to the fact that something in me had finished closing. Not a door, a wound. The kind that leaves you more certain on the other side. Not smaller, not softer, but clearer about what you're worth and what you'll never settle for again. And the ending, as it turned out, was only the beginning of the life I'd actually been meant to have.